my friends.
Okay, you're streaming live on YouTube, but I don't see the red light.
I do. I see it live on YouTube.
But there's a light in the room that I'm.
Oh.
Tell me if you can call it. Tell me if I'm. All right, we are live. I would like to call the meeting of the West Fargo Library Board of Directors to order on August 13th, 2020. We'll start with the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
To clarify that the consent agenda. Motion passed. Move on to the regular agenda. The first item we have is board operations and procedures training with City Attorney John Shockley. John, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, everybody, and thank you for letting me join the meeting virtually. Every couple of years when we have a new city commission, when there's an election or new board members, I go through kind of an overall training with different elected officials or appointed officials, and I try to cover kind of some of the basics of open meetings and open records and some of the items that you probably need to know as board members. And so I try to start, very general and move to the specific. And just a specific, from a very high level, the library board is a separate board from the West Fargo City Commission. As you know, you're appointed by the West Fargo City Commission, and you have within your authority to operate the library, make expenditures out of the budget, to hire and fire the executive director. But ultimately, the employees are City of West Fargo employees. So it's somewhat of a unique relationship. The North Dakota Attorney General refers to library boards as the alter ego of a city commission. I thought that was a good perception to say that you're acting in furtherance of the duties of the city, but they wanted to create some independence to a library board. Looking back at the timing of the statutes that created a separate library board, I really think that was the idea was to provide some independence from the political world regarding what should be in libraries and what shouldn't be. I think those days are probably less now than they were back in the 50s and 60s when the statutory language was created. And so that's really why library boards are here, and that's generally the scope of your authority. Your primary point of contact is the library director, and the library director would, is in charge of the staff at the library. From, I think some of the other important items as board members that you need to be aware of is first and foremost are the open meetings rules. So we are conducting a meeting that is electronic and virtual. In North Dakota, and I'll talk pre-pandemic, in North Dakota, meetings occur whenever you have a quorum of your committee. And so anytime there's a majority, and that includes the chair, that is considered a meeting. And then when you have a quorum together, that talks about the business before the committee. So if you're talking about any library issues, that constitutes a meeting. Now, social chance gatherings, so if you had a Christmas party and everybody was invited and you don't talk about any library issues, that does not constitute a meeting. And so the meeting means that it's open to the public. Since we're in sort of a different setting, the public, we're trying to set it up, have been trying to run meetings so the public can see us virtually or attend in person. Prior to the COVID situation, most public meetings meant that people would show up and they weren't necessarily broadcast, or they were broadcast but at a later date. So this is something that's new. You can call into a meeting, even but pre-COVID, a person could call in by telephone and participate in the meeting. The only requirement pre-COVID was that somebody had to be at the normal meeting location physically for the board. The North Dakota governor temporarily suspended that rule and allowed people to call in virtually from different settings and didn't necessarily have to be in the normal place of meeting. In general, most all meetings the general rule is that most all meetings are public, except when we go into executive session. There's very few times in which the library board would actually go into executive session. The first would be if somebody sued the library board, which I've actually never had a lawsuit involving the library board. And I've been doing this for 15 years with the city. So I don't know if that would ever happen, but that would be a possibility. The second would be if you were considering making an offer to purchase some land and you wanted to give direction to a real estate agent or myself or city staff regarding what the purchase price should be, what you would offer, because obviously you wouldn't want to give the other side what your range was because you're trying to negotiate a sale. So it wouldn't work very well if you had a public meeting and told everybody how much your maximum offer was. There are some other limited circumstances if you have an issue that's potentially likely to arise in litigation, or an issue in which it looks like there's a high likelihood that it could end in litigation, or something that as the attorney for the library board, I say we need to go into executive session because it requires some confidential communications. That might be if there's an internal problem at the library that we need to talk about confidentially. I've only ever had that once with the library board, and that's been many, many years ago. So it happens very rarely. So the general rule is most meetings are open to the public. And then the second major differential between a public hearing and a meeting that's open to the public. So sometimes you'll hear a public hearing before the city commission. What a public hearing is it's right for the public to speak. So they can come and approach the board and talk about whatever issue they want to that's relevant to the public hearing. I don't know of many public hearings that the library board actually conducts. The only one that I'm aware of is if you were ever to purchase a building, you're required to conduct a public hearing. Otherwise, the public is entitled to attend the meeting. That means they're entitled to attend and observe. They aren't entitled to speak. You, as a board, you can certainly allow them to speak, but they're not entitled to do it. One of my general rules is at a meeting is, as long as the person from the public is acting respectfully, it's generally better to let them speak. And then, don't necessarily respond to what their question is at the time, because you may not have all the answers, and just, divert, say we'll talk to staff about it, or have staff research the issue. Where open meetings becomes an issue for new board members is in electronic communications. That can either be through Facebook or through email, or somewhat through telephone. And so I'll go through the email example first of all. So the Century Code defines meetings as a quorum of the board. So if one board member emails all of the other board members and says, this is what I think about fill in the blank, that we should buy this type of library book, and one other board member hits reply all, that could be construed as a meeting occurring because you have a quorum of the board meeting electronically and trying to make some sort of a decision. And so my general rule is don't hit reply all. You're perfectly fine communicating with staff. The library director may send the entire board an email message, tell me when the board is available for a meeting or what items you want on the agenda. Just don't hit reply all. Reply all has a tendency to get people in trouble. The other is what are referred to as serial meetings. And we've not really had a problem with that in my memory. But that occurs when one board member talks to another board member and says, this is how I'm going to vote on issue A, then goes to the next board member and says, I'm voting on issue A like this. The other board member I talked to said, I'm voting like that, and goes from board member to board member and arrives at a decision. That's referred to as a serial meeting, and that also violates the open meetings laws. If you ever have any questions about open meetings, I'm always available to answer those questions. I'm happy to come to a board meeting and talk about it. Kind of some of the other important issues that you need to be aware of as a board member are open records. North Dakota is what I refer to as a sunshine state, which means that almost all records of a political subdivision and its board members are open to the public. That means your emails, that means personnel files, that means many types of communications that you wouldn't normally think would be available for the public are open. There are some limited exceptions, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. But for the most part, all emails, all documents are considered open. And so if you send an email and it contains information in it that you don't feel comfortable with, it getting printed in the newspaper, you probably shouldn't hit send because somebody could ask for that email. Not saying they would, but they certainly can. And so my general rule is don't put something in an email that you don't want to see printed in the newspaper because it's very easy for reporters to ask for all emails, go through it, and you've essentially done all of their work for a story. It's very easy for them to put a story together. Also, anything that that includes any emails you might have between board members regarding library issues. And so if you do have a library board issue, don't mix that together with your personal matters because somebody can request that email and they may find out where you're going for dinner. You know, that's a harmless one, but there's other emails that I can't redact because it contains information that a board member may not want to be public. And so if you're emailing something about a library business, just stick with library business because otherwise it can show up in the newspaper. There are a few limited exceptions to the open records rules. That would be any of confidential information like telephone numbers, personal telephone numbers, or social security numbers, those sorts of things that you typically think is confidential. Also, if you were ever interviewing candidates for a position, the names aren't public until you select the last 3 finalists, then the names become public. There's also certain disciplinary issues that don't become public until you're final with them. But the general rule is almost everything is an open record, and anytime you put something in email, it can show up in the newspaper. If we do get an open records request, generally we would ask the executive director to search the records that she has and then ask all the board members to respond back to her with any emails that she might have. And then we go through a process of looking at those emails to see if there's any information that needs to be redacted, and then we have to release them. I think the next kind of general area I'd like to touch upon is just general board meetings. So the chair runs the meeting. As board members, you can make motions, you can second motions. The appropriate procedure is to have, you can certainly talk about things and then make a motion. Generally, you need to make a motion, a second, have discussion on it, and vote on it. You can make, and I'll just briefly touch upon the major motion items. So you make a motion, that's really your basics. You make a motion in a second. You need an affirmative vote of the members to approve it. If you make a motion and you don't say anything and the motion passes, so somebody made a motion to approve buying a new copy machine, and it's on a voice vote, and the chair says it's passed. Even if you didn't vote, you're still counted in the winning side. So if you are opposed to something, you need to say you're opposed to something. Otherwise, you'll be counted as agreeing with it. And I always try to make sure that board members are aware of that, because some people want to be on record as being against something. And so if you are against something, that's fine. That's not my role to say you should or shouldn't be against something. Just make sure that you state on the record, say no, and then you're counted as voting no, because otherwise you'll be counted in the majority. Motions to table, anybody can make a motion to table. You get a second and the item's tabled. Motions to table are considered non-debatable. And so that just means that somebody can say, I'm not comfortable with this issue right now, I make a motion to table. The rule is that it's tabled till the next meeting. And generally it's helpful for staff if you can explain if there's additional information that you want or need, that's the reason why you're tabling it. There's motions to amend motions. There's some other more complex parliamentary issues. To be frank, I can go into that if you want, but my experience has been library boards we typically don't get into those issues with parliamentarian issues. I'm certainly happy to answer them. I think now it's probably best for me just to let you ask questions and I'll answer them.
I have three very different questions. Do you want all three at once, or do you want me to take turns?
How about one at a time?
Okay, so just from a parliamentary procedure, generally we agree with most of our thoughts on this board, but say I do disagree. Is the technical the right thing to do when everyone else votes to say, and it's my turn to vote, do I say no, or do I also vote aye, but just when they say anyone against?
You want to vote when they ask against, you'll want to say no, or it depends upon how the chair wants to call it. Sometimes chairs will say, all in favor, please say aye. And the people who are in favor will say aye. And then the chair will say, all opposed, say nay. It's really up to how the chair calls it, but you'll definitely want to speak up when the question is asked, who's voting no.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, I would say probably, I have a separate email for the board here. Probably 65% of the emails I get are related just to the board, and I'd have putting anything to the public in those emails, but I can just use, I wouldn't have to use 100% of those, like in other words, if I have an email address, 65% of the emails that come in are for the board, 35% are for something, personal emails. Would you recommend I only have an email address set up specifically just 100% for board activity? Or is it something where you can have your emails intermingled as long as I'm willing to provide the ones related to the board to the public?
Well, it's certainly up to you. My recommendation is to have a separate email for library business for the following reasons. Oftentimes we do get open records requests, and it's much easier for you as a board member just to go to that email account and send everything through to the library. It's not required. You can certainly continue to use your personal email address. It's just you'll have to go through and sort that account. I will note, and this would be unlikely to happen at a library board level. It does from time to time happen at city levels. When you get into a litigation situation, you can have an attorney that is requesting through the discovery process all of the emails, and they could have access through the discovery process to your private emails, which nobody wants that. And so that's why I always say it's easier just to use your public email for all your library business. And if somebody somebody has a question, they know you're on the library board, they have a question about the library and you answer it, what I would say is just forward it to your other email account or delete it, because the open records law only requires you to produce emails or other documents you have in your possession. So once an email is permanently deleted, it's no longer in your possession. That said, it could still be on somebody's server. Like if it's still on the city's server, it would be picked up by our sweep. So still, it goes back to that general rule, don't put anything in an email that you don't want published.
How about just emails from Carissa to ourselves about setting up a meeting or something? Should we also, I tend to save things in case I need them later. Do you recommend generally, if it's not important, if it's not vital, deleting everything regarding this after it's taken care of?
Well, it's up to you how you want to handle it. In that situation, the city would still have a copy of the email. It's hard for me as an attorney to recommend that anybody delete anything. What I can say is that if you don't have it in your possession, you don't have to produce it. So
Okay.
it's up to you how often you want to delete your emails.
And final question is, say in my example, the New York City Public Library hires Carissa away from us for a $5 million salary. We have to hire a new executive director. I don't remember last year, did we go into what you call the closed door executive session or whatever? Did we go into that when we hire, like select which one of our 3 finalists get chosen? Or is that public or was that part private? I don't remember.
Oh, I believe we had and I can't remember precisely. I may have, I don't, there's been so many meetings in the last year, I can't remember, but it would have been public after the 3 finalists were identified, but I don't remember the library board going into executive session over the hiring. I think we had, obviously you got the best candidate that you hired, and I think that the city participated a little bit in the process. And there was an interview committee that sat down and interviewed the applicants, and we got to the 3 finalists, and I think they came before the board for interviews.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, John, this is Alana. I have just a really simple question, but we always get a motion to adjourn and a second. Do we need to vote on that for an adjournment?
You technically do. There is, as a standing, if it's a regular meeting, so here's the distinction with a motion to adjourn. Technically, if it's a standing meeting, it's your regular meeting, like it happens on the same day, the same time every month. The chair can technically adjourn the meeting. So the chair can just gavel out of a regular meeting and say we stand adjourned. I think that in West Fargo, it's always been a kind of a matter of practice where the chair asks for a motion and a second to adjourn. If you have a motion and a second, you do need to vote on it. Now that's differentiated from a special meeting where the chair would need a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. It's a unique issue of parliamentary procedure where on a regular meeting, the chair has the authority to gavel out of it.
Thank you.
I think on occasion, and maybe Krista can give us a few specific examples, but I think on occasion we have questioned ourselves on whether or not we had to have a vote on a few things. And I guess that would be really helpful as a board to have some clarity on what precisely we do need to have a specific motion and vote on.
Great, good question. So in the order of hierarchy from a library board stand perspective, where you definitely need a motion is if you're hiring somebody, if you're entering into a contract. So, the library is buying a whole bunch of copy machines. You definitely need to have a contract approved with a motion. If you're adopting a library policy across the board, you'd need a motion. If there's some other smaller like operational issues where the executive director or the library director is just simply asking for input in, well, what should we do on Saturday morning? Should we have this program or that program? It's probably not necessary to have a motion where you can just get a consensus from the board. But you can always have a motion. It doesn't hurt anything to have a motion and a second. The nice part about that is that then you know where the board is at on a particular position. But for those major items, you definitely need a motion. Especially when money is being spent, that's really the critical point, or a contract being issued.
Thank you.
And like when you approve your annual budget, you need to do that by motion also and second. And your consent agenda, you'd need to approve by motion and a second.
John, could you touch on a little bit more about the differences between the consent and the regular agenda and what should go where and why?
So consent agendas are utilized by boards to put items on that would normally not have any discussion or very limited discussion. That would be your bills to be paid, or maybe it's something that you talked about last month and it's just I'll use the copy machine. The prior month, the director said we were going to purchase 5 copiers. Are you okay with that? So yeah, we're okay with it. And you put a contract on and you just approve that under your consent agenda. Those are items that typically you don't expect to have any discussion about. That would include routine contracts, bills to be paid. If it's, just some type of action that you just don't need to have a long discussion about it. It's just approved. The general rule is that any board member can take an item off of the consent agenda, because the whole idea behind a consent agenda is it's something that will have universal support. And so if one person doesn't know if they're going to vote on something, obviously you don't have, unanimous support for it. Items that should go on the regular agenda are topics that you might want to have more discussion about. I would consider them to be more strategic items, long-term plans or programs for the future or library development. Those sorts of issues would be on your regular agenda. The consent is really the spot for routine business that you don't really need to. If you're getting the same bill every month, you don't really need to talk about the same bill you got last month. It's approved under the consent, and if somebody doesn't feel comfortable with it, they can pull it off the consent agenda.
When would be the appropriate time to do that if you wanted to pull something off the consent agenda and put it on the regular agenda?
So my advice is if you get the packet, when you get the packet, if you see something that you don't want on consent, that would be the time to email the library director and say, I'd like this off of consent. The sooner that you can tell the staff that something's coming off of consent, it gives them opportunity to maybe bring in the person that's the subject matter expertise in that area, or to more fully explain the item. You can certainly pull it off anytime up to the time that it's brought before the board, but the sooner you can do it, it's more helpful to staff so that they can get the right person or the right information to help answer that question.
Thank you.
John, when somebody has a desire to add an item to an agenda during the meeting, can you talk about who can do that and what the rules are around that?
So a good question. In North Dakota, any regular meeting, you can add something under new business. So it's been a while since I looked at the agenda, but you probably want to have a new business section. And so 2 board members can ask to add something under new business. So they bring it up and you need a motion to add it to new business. So, you have a new business section and the chair asks, is there any new items that come before or new business to come before the board? Somebody says, I'd really like to talk about this. And everybody else is like, no, we're not talking about that. It can't be put on the agenda at that point without a motion. But the chair could add something because the chair has the power to add something to the agenda under new business. And so those are really your 2 options. Either the chair adds it under new business or two board members can add something. And then they would make a motion in a second. And then there's the motion, question if you actually want to add it to the agenda. That's a regular meeting. During a special meeting of the board, you can't add anything to the agenda. It's only the topics that are on the agenda. So I don't know if anybody's watched this city commission meetings, but sometimes you'll see where they'll start and they'll say, we're having a special meeting today, so the only items we can talk about are what's on the agenda. And somebody steps up to the podium and says, well, I'd really like to talk about something. And that the mayor is in somewhat of an awkward position and says, well, I understand you want to talk about it, but I can't because we're in a special meeting. You should go talk to staff about that. And sometimes the person understands it, sometimes they don't.
Guess it's up to us to make our meetings interesting enough that the public, that we have that kind of issue. So far, we haven't had that issue with the public. So if you're listening, public, let us know what you want us to bring to the meeting.
Well, contrary to everybody's thinking, city attorneys love boring meetings. Because that means things are running as they should be running, nice and quiet, and everything's running like it should.
John, I have a question about approvals for expenditures. In the past, so this year I had brought an item to the library board, and it was, so I knew that I was going to have unspent funds in a certain line and was going to spend them in a different way. And I'm not sure that we all necessarily had clarity on whether something like that required an item on the regular agenda, whether something like that should be on the consent agenda, or whether it should be on the agenda at all. Do you have any advice to offer on that?
Yeah, so as budgeted expenditures, if it's been budgeted in a line item, normally you wouldn't, like buying extra paper for the office, it's an office supplies, you don't need to bring that expenditure before the board. If you're reallocating from a line item into a new area, so the money's been budgeted, but you're going to reallocate it, that's an amendment to the budget. You need to bring that before the board for approval. Now, something like that, it's really up to the board. If they're comfortable with it, it can go under consent. I've seen a lot of boards that will handle budget adjustments under consent because it's usually something that the board, to be quite frank, the board is comfortable with the director or city manager or administrator's recommendation that the money be reallocated to a different project. And they'll just do it under consent because they know that they're in general agreement with it. But if you are reallocating something from one line item to another line item, it's considered an amendment to the budget, and you really do need board approval for that, whether it be consent or regular. And what one thing that you may want to consider as we start out this next 2-year cycle is oftentimes boards will authorize the director to have certain, like you can spend up to $10,000 or reallocate $10,000. There's no magic to that number. It could be 1,000, it could be 5,000, could be 150,000, but you just give some pre-authorization so you have flexibility for day-to-day things and you don't have to come back to the board for every single little budget adjustment. And that's totally up to the board how much you would normally want to authorize the director to have that authority to enter into those contracts or make those line item adjustments.
Carissa, do you know if any flexibility with that? Is there a number that we have as a board that you can move within the budget? Or is that something we should discuss at another time?
You're asking if there's a number that I would sort of recommend for
I'm asking if
that, or-
currently, if you can move $1,000 around in the budget, and the
Yep.
$1,000 is the X factor in this conversation. Any number. Do you have any authority? Does the executive authority?
Okay, yep, I
Sorry.
get your question. Yep. So in other words, has there been ever a resolution of the library board giving me authority to move X dollar amount?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
not that I am aware of. John, are you aware of anything?
Oh, I think your predecessor had authority for, it was either 1,000 or 5,000.
Help me out, but didn't we discuss something about this in the last 6 meetings or so, or was that a different, it was regarding a dollar amount, but was it regarding a different issue than just simply moving it around?
We discussed a specific expenditure, I think. Maybe that's what you're remembering, Steve.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Yep. And that would be a good example. That is the example that I was thinking about. So we knew we'd have unspent funds in a certain line. I proposed spending that dollar amount on something else. I got a motion from the library board and it was approved. So to kind of frame the question differently is if the board were to set a dollar amount in some cases, then I would not need to bring that to the library board if the board had already passed a resolution or something authorizing a dollar amount. Is that right, John?
That's right. If you had passed a resolution that said the executive director or the library director has the authority to reallocate up to $10,000 and enter into $10,000 contracts without board approval, then smaller expenditures you could do just, within your discretion. You just notify the board that, hey, I made this change.
Based on your legal knowledge, is $10,000 an unreasonable, just for an example, is that an unreasonable number for our budget based on your other city expertise?
No, and in fact, I think that some larger cities have $150,000 for their city administrator. Obviously, your budget is smaller, so 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000 is more than, that's more than appropriate. Because I mean, to be quite frank, things happen during the month, and there's probably, there's smaller expenditures, and I always say that you authorize your director to have that authority, but bring back at the next meeting, just inform the board.
And John, if the board previously with the other previous director had approved an amount, that would carry over to this director.
No, it typically those types of approvals only stay with the current board because each board is kind of a new entity. The idea is that you as a board have authority for expenditures, and every time there's a new board, we just got done with our municipal elections, the new appointments take place. You as a new board, you could have different board members who are more comfortable with a higher amount or a lower amount. That's up to each board because it's very much unique to that board. And so every couple of years, you go back and just either affirm the authority that the administrator has or the director, or you increase or decrease the amount.
Does anybody else have any questions for John?
I do have one more that I think would be good for us to talk about. Can you outline, John, the requirements for expenditures using the reserve fund? Or how can the fund be used, I guess, is another way of putting it.
So the idea of a reserve fund is so that you can maintain sufficient funds if you have an unexpected decline in your revenue or an emergency expenditure. A good example is that, a pipe bursts in the library, floods the library, insurance doesn't cover everything, you would use your reserve for that. Reserves can be used for virtually any type of city operation. That said, you have, some minimum amount of reserves that you want to maintain because you don't want to run without some type of security in place for those unexpected events. And so the rule is, as long as the board authorizes the expenditure and it's for library purposes. Obviously, you can't use library reserve funds for non-library purposes. You can use them. It's just kind of the idea that you're supposed to use them sparingly for one-time expenditures or to make up an unanticipated revenue shortfall, with the idea that you'll rebuild your reserves at a later date. And it really comes down to, that's a true policy decision for a board when they dip into the reserves. Some entities will have huge reserves just because they're large organizations, like the city of Fargo and I believe the city of West Fargo. For their reserves, they have written policies of when and how much you can, how much reserve you should maintain, and how often that should be replenished and how that should be invested. I can't remember what the library reserves are offhand, but I don't think the library, to my knowledge, has any written policies about their use of reserves.
John, thank you for your time today. I think we all learned a lot. I'm sure we will have follow-up questions as time goes on.
And I'm going to try to make a habit out of attending at least every other library board meeting. The last couple of months have been very crazy because we were moving. Once again, we moved to West Fargo, but we're in the process of moving, so it was a crazy couple of months. But I plan on attending at least the first about hour. So if you have any questions come up, just let me know. So hopefully things change where we can be meeting more in person. So
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the director's report.
Hello. So I have a few items tonight. As you know, last month we reopened to the public on Monday, July 13th. And people were and are still very glad to be back in the space, being able to do things that they missed, like even browsing for items and using our computers and technology and interacting, although at a distance with our staff. So we've been happy about that. We're currently open with some modified hours until 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday, which is different than our regular hours, but we will be returning to our normal evening hours. So until 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday after Labor Day weekend, because this is also when we normally resume offering Sunday open hours again. So we will be making that change in September. I have an update for you on our strategic planning project and our community input project. So it's been a while since we talked about this, and I'm excited to be making some steps on it again now that we're reopened and we've gotten into somewhat of a flow where we feel like there's some normalcy. So in July, I started working again with Folkways, the consulting group that we hired to help us with our community input project, and Melissa Richard, the city communications director, to get going again on the project and kind of pick up where we left off. So far, I have worked with Folkways to kind of revisit what our goals with the project are. And we've started putting together a list of stakeholders and library users who can participate in initial interviews. And the initial interviews are what they will use to get started building an overall strategy for the rest of the project. So we're starting to make some first steps with it. And then another piece of it also is restarting our staff discussions that we had begun in the winter and spring. So depending on how things progress in the month of August with Folkways, I may invite Folkways to the September board meeting to have them meet with all of you and reorient everybody to the project at that meeting, and also give some updates on their work thus far at that time. So I'm excited, and we're excited to be getting that project back off the ground again. And as you already know, as of last month, we are a fine-free library, and fines have now been removed from patrons' accounts. And as a result, about 600 people who were previously blocked are now unblocked and able to use their library again. So that is great. And staff have really done a great job of putting out communication about the change and talking to patrons about the change. And we're going to keep that going just because, you know, it takes a while for word to get out about changes like that. So we wrapped our first ever virtual summer reading program at the end of July, and congrats to our awesome community of readers and our staff for an unusual but great summer. And August 12th last year, Commission President Dardis declared August 12th Read Every Day Day in West Fargo, Red Day. So yesterday we teamed up with the Little Red Reading Bus, and we had a virtual sort of end of summer celebration to celebrate all the awesome job that our community did reading this summer. And so it was a virtual read along in partnership with the Little Red Reading Bus, and Commission President Dardis was also there and read the proclamation for Red Day. So we had about 40 to 50 participants who joined in on a Zoom call, and it was really cool to see all the kiddos reading along and doing their craft on the screen. So it was awesome that we were able to still bring the community together in that way, even though we couldn't be physically together this year. So as far as programming goes, we wrapped the summer reading program, but we still have programming that is happening right now. And one of the big programming initiatives that is going on is the One Book, One Community program. So this is an annual community read where the area libraries get together and collaborate and select one read that will be read across Moorhead, Fargo, and West Fargo. And this year's read is The Lager Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan Straddle. And typically, this project involves bringing the author in, and there's usually a community author talk. And this year, that event is going to be held virtually. So it's going to be held on September 24th. So we're bringing J. Ryan Straddle, author of Lager Queen of Minnesota, in virtually. So keep an eye out for that. It's a great book. It's a funny book with lots of Midwestern isms and Midwestern characters and themes of women and business and family and cooking. And so if you haven't read it, grab a copy. We have copies at the library. And we also have a series of events that staff have planned around One Book, One Community and this year's community read. So if you check out our Facebook page, you'll see that we're currently hosting a series of virtual events that are a Women in Business series. So it's a 5-session series of virtual events with people from the local business community. And so the 5 different panels that we're bringing together, we had one last week, and that was a panel of local brewers and bakers talking about their experiences as business owners in the community. And we have actually one going on tonight, which is about honing your business strategy. And then we have another one coming up in August, finding funding for female founders. And then we have 2 in September. And one is going to be navigating technology for your business. And then the other one is finding and retaining talent. So it's a great opportunity for people who are interested in getting into business in the community. And it's also just great for anybody to learn more about the local business community too. So another exciting program that we have going on in conjunction with One Book, One Community is we have a 4-part video series happening that is going to come out on our Facebook page. And we've had one come out so far, I believe. And it's a cooking class series. So again, in with those themes of Midwestern food and cooking. And so staff partnered up with Square One Kitchens and 4 resident female business owners to produce this video series. So it was a great collaboration, and Kirsten Hennigan, our adult services manager, is the mastermind behind this series of programs in conjunction with One Book, One Community. So she's doing a great job. And I'll also put a plug in too, if you heard us talking at various board meetings about this new tool that we're using, right, called Beanstack, which we're using for to help people track their reading as part of the summer reading program, but it doesn't stop with the summer reading program. We're also using that tool to engage people in our other programming initiatives. So there is a set of challenges that people can follow along with for One Book, One Community as well. So if you've not tried Beanstack yet, the challenge that is set up for One Book, One Community is a great way to get your feet wet if you're an adult reader. And it's not all just about tracking your reading. It's also about you can do activities and follow along with our programming that way. And it'll also get you out and about and experiencing what the local business community has to offer. So that is all I have tonight. And thank you.
Question, Carissa. I don't know if the rest of the board realizes this, but unfortunately, because of COVID, the West Fargo West Fest parade is not going to happen this year. Have you considered any changes to the library being closed that day to the public? Because of the parade, normally they load up in your parking lot. It's a zoo right around the library every year. This year, I don't anticipate that crowd because there's no parade. Do you anticipate any changes, or what are your staff planning on doing on that day because there's no parade?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are going to be very heavily involved this year with Westfest, and we are going to have a presence. So the parade is not happening, but other events are happening that day. And so there's going to be a concert with Penny and Pals, and so there's a craft and vendor fair and things like that. So we are going to be outdoors and probably have a pop-up library and things like that. So we are going to be involved, and our parking lot is going to be used by the vendors for the craft and vendor show. So we are going to close the library, but be out in the community and participating in Westfest.
I would recommend your marketing officer really get that out to the public so that you get your, the library gets credit for its awesome public activities right now.
Absolutely. Yes.
Any special thoughts that the public has shared since the library's been open? Any interesting stories? Any public responses? I know you can't share them all. Hopefully you've gotten dozens of positive comments, but is there any special stories or comments that stand out that you can share, just so we I guess so we can appreciate the efforts that you've done, so the public appreciates the efforts you've done to reopen?
I think that, like anybody, we're all just so grateful to do things that seem so normal to us in the past. And I do remember that the first week that we opened sticks out in my mind the most. And the people that I talked to were just giddy to be able to be in the space and with their kids browsing for items again and doing something that felt normal and having that independence in the space and being in the space again. So that's been great to see. And I would say that's continued. People are just happy to be able to be back and using our services. And I know that our staff have really great connections with the community and our users. So, there's that piece of it too, on both from the public's standpoint and staff standpoint. We missed each other. So yeah, it's been good.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. Other business, is there anybody who would like to add anything to other business? No. Okay, we are to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Larry second, he's muted, but I saw. Okay, any discussion?
Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, same sign. Motion adjourned. Thank you for participating in today's hybrid meeting. This was pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with school starting, you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
The red light is off, they're done, right? That's what she said. I have never paid attention, okay, when at first, when you guys were talking about that, I was like, what red light? And I have never paid attention to that. Tiny, tiny little.
For the red light. These lights are incredibly bright. I'm not a fan. I will not run based on that alone.
Now just imagine being up there for 4 hours.
I know, well, I thought maybe it was brighter here because of the sign, but I think another hour. Do you want to try to set up?
Yeah, let's do that.